After my son-in-law yelled, "Clean the bathroom." For the third time, I revealed an amazing secret. Betty sat in her cozy living room, knitting needles in hand, the rhythmic clatter soothing her. Flowers bloomed vibrantly in her garden outside, reflecting a life fostered with love. But that tranquility shattered when Mark burst in, his voice raised and burning with irritation. "Can you please just clean the bathroom?" Rage colored his words, each syllable slicing through the air like glass. Betty felt dismissed, reduced to an obligation, a far cry from the nurturing role she'd upheld for so long. Her heart raced as she blinked, holding back a wave of emotion that threatened to spill over. Years of commitment felt obliterated in that charged exchange. She hesitated, questioning if Mark truly understood the role she played in this family. The years spent nurturing Lisa, their child-rearing journey, all felt insignificant at that moment. Hadn't she always been the glue? An unrecognized weight had settled on her chest, forming a barricade of doubt and frustration. Clenching her needles, she felt painfully aware of the growing distance between her and the family she thought she knew. As days wore on, more exchanges filled the air with tension. Betty would make lunch, only for Mark to comment on the messy counter, an ongoing battle of respect versus neglect. She kept her silence, finding herself drowning in responsibilities long worn thin. Every glance from Mark stung, turning memories of family dinners into reminders of conflict. She needed to confront this imbalance, but how? One afternoon, she sat on her porch, sipping tea while trying to suppress rising anger. Shifting in her seat, she recalled Charlie's dreams of turning their home into a thriving business, a vision now overtaken by neglect and weeds. Charlie's patch, she called it, holding his memory close, and the neglect of the property echoed the neglect she felt within herself. That unquenched longing for acknowledgement ignited something daring inside her, a chance to reclaim her story. The feels of determination coursed through her veins as she thought of the possibilities. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Betty began clearing the land, confronting the tangled passions of the past with every shovel of dirt she turned. Mark's harsh words echoed in her mind. "It's just a bunch of weeds, Betty. You're wasting your time." That dismissal cut deep. Each question of her efforts pushed her into uncharted emotional territory. She found herself fighting an internal struggle between wanting to assert her worth and wrestling with the doubt Mark's lack of support perpetuated. Days of labor unraveled threads of hope dipped in despair when an old box surfaced from beneath the soil, holding memories tied in photographs and letters, an untold story. She opened it, heart racing, only to be interrupted by Mark's incredulity as he stormed into Charlie's patch. The emerging tension thickened the air. "What were you thinking?" His words flared up the unease between them, but somewhere within her swelled a relentless drive. This was her chance to reveal her journey, risking everything in the hope of bridging the chasm created by misunderstanding. Would she find the voice to assert that which was so often silenced? Would the shadows of the past pull them together or tear them apart? As they stood there, anticipation crackled like the autumn leaves outside, leaving Betty on the edge of revelation, where every unspoken word filled the air with a desperate urgency. Betty took a breath, steadying herself against the weight of Mark's disapproval. The air grew taut, thick with unspoken resentments. A part of her felt shattered, exposed under his scrutiny, a fragile echo of who she once was. She had spent years molding her identity around the needs of her family, burying her dreams under the same soil that now held those old memories. Suddenly, those memories felt more like chains than treasures. "Why do you bother?" Mark's voice dripped with disdain, making her gut knot. "You should just focus on what's important." Each word was a bead added to the string of frustration she wore around her heart. "Important to whom?" she challenged, her voice surprising even herself. A flush of adrenaline washed over her, emboldening her from within. Mark's brow furrowed, but his bewilderment only fueled her need to assert herself. What had she been silently tolerating all these years? As they both stood there, a veil of the past mingled with the present. This garden, once a shared dream with Charlie, now felt like her sanctuary, one she could reclaim. Flashes of laughter from long-gone summer days filled her mind, the moments where she wasn't just acknowledged, but celebrated. Once, the flowers had symbolized hope. Now they were mirrors reflecting her hopes, still buried under layers of neglect, both of the garden and of herself. "I'm not wasting my time, Mark," she said, her voice low but firm. "This is about more than just weeds." She could see the confusion in his eyes clouding over with disbelief, but, resolute, she continued. "It's about finding a part of me that's been lost. This garden was Charlie's dream, but I can make it mine too." His scoff echoed through the clearing, but inside a spark began to ignite within her. There it was, a flicker of self-empowerment that had been buried for too long. Reaching into the box, she carefully removed a faded photograph of herself beside Charlie, smiles wide and genuine. "This was once a place of joy for us," she said, holding it up. "I refuse to let anyone diminish that." Mark's eyes narrowed, but uncertainty danced within the confusion. "You can't keep living in the past, Betty. It's just a garden," he retorted. Yet there was a hint of hesitation in his dismissal, as if her conviction challenged his own understanding of what mattered. Just then, Betty felt the weight of her years and the silent sacrifices begin to shift. It wasn't merely about the garden or cleaning a bathroom, it was about her identity. She wondered if Mark recognized that this was about reclaiming purpose, something intrinsic that had been silenced by the very man she protected for too long. "I'm done being just your mother-in-law or the woman who cleans up after you," she declared, feeling her resolve cement itself. "This garden is a part of me, and it deserves to flourish. So do I." Silence stretched between them, charged with tension. Could Mark accept this new iteration of her? Was he willing to acknowledge a side of Betty he had conveniently overlooked? In that suspended moment, she sensed an opportunity not just for herself, but for healing, for them both. She had touched the surface of her potential, but felt the deeper current stirring. The choice lay before her. Would she push forward, even amidst the uncertainty? "Maybe it's time for us to address what's really broken, don't you think?" she challenged, the words almost daring him to confront the unspoken rift. A flicker of desperation crossed his face that hinted at an uncomfortable truth. As she stood poised at the brink of discovery, Betty felt something unmistakable. She was ready for whatever confrontation awaited. But would Mark match her courage? Would this marked turning point lead to reconnection, or would it draw a deeper line in the sand? The time for hiding was over. They were on the verge of a revelation that would define not just Betty's future, but the fabric of their entire family. And as Mark searched her gaze, she wondered if they both understood the gravity of the moment they were sharing. What she had uncovered was just the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead. As Mark stood there, the silence heavy with unresolved tension, Betty felt the ground beneath her shift. She was not just battling to reclaim the garden. She was cultivating the essence of who she had forgotten she could be. Each heartbeat resonated with clarity, propelling her forward. Yet, uncertainty lingered in the back of her mind. Would Mark allow her to traverse this newly uncovered path? "Address what's broken," he echoed, disbelief still swirling in his eyes. It felt strange to Betty, this dance of power defined by his dismissal of her struggles. But as she heaved a breath, she understood that she wouldn't merely be a passive player in their narrative anymore. Today was the day she would outline the boundaries of her worth, like the newly tilled rows she was slowly preparing in the garden. "I can't keep ignoring my life while you nitpick the things you consider important," she said, each word deliberate and sharp. "What you see as a silly garden is part of my own narrative, my own potential." The empowerment she felt was like the first light of dawn, illuminating the dark corners of her psyche where fear had resided too long. Mark's stance softened. She could see cracks in his armor of indifference. Beneath the layers of disapproval, perhaps there existed the slightest glimmer of understanding. She seized the moment, pressing onward. "If you want things to change, we need to confront what we've allowed to fester. I deserve to be heard." Mark shifted his weight, visibly calculating her words. Brittany noticed the flicker of indecision in his gaze and pressed on, her voice tremulous yet unwavering. "We've both lost something. You've lost sight of the person I used to be, and I've constantly measured my worth against your expectations. This garden can thrive again, just like we can." Betty clenched her fists, wrestling with the fear that threatened to creep back in. But instead of retreating, she focused on the photograph still clutched in her hand. What would she teach herself about rediscovering joy if she surrendered to the moment? "Promise me this," she continued, a newfound steadiness anchoring her statement. "If I put in the effort to nurture this garden, will you at least try to see the value in my journey? Don't you want me to flourish too?" Her voice trembled, revealing the vulnerability buried beneath years of compliance. As if the weight of her question hung in the air, Mark's expression shifted, a protective veneer slowly cracking as his internal conflict became palpable. Would he let go of the rigid expectations that tethered them both in an emotional stasis? The air shifted around them, charged with possibilities. Betty could almost feel the seeds of change settling into their respective places. Perhaps this was the moment they both had been waiting for, an opportunity not just for a mutual understanding, but for healing. What if this garden symbolizes more than just plants? What if it stands for our growth, together, she ventured, stepping closer, her heart racing at the unfamiliarity of raw honesty. She noticed how Mark's stubborn demeanor faltered, his brow furrowing as he was confronted with the implications of her words. With every heartbeat, the walls he had built against vulnerability threatened to collapse, and Betty felt a hope that had been buried for so long begin to sprout within both of them. Just then, Mark's gaze shifted as if he were seeing her newly, not as a woman defined solely by familial roles, but as an individual with aspirations and dreams. Yet as they stood on the precipice of redefining their bond, a lingering doubt remained. Would this fleeting moment of connection be enough to propel them into a new chapter, or would it simply dissolve into the air like petals in the wind? This was uncharted territory for them both. "What happens if we start to unearth the truths we've been avoiding?" Betty challenged softly, knowing the real journey was only beginning. Would they dare to face the remnants of their troubled past together? With courage igniting an impulse within her, she held tight to the photograph, ready for whatever awaited, her next destination uncertain, yet unavoidable. And yet the question loomed. Amidst the layers of their entangled lives, could they nurture hope and cultivate the fragile roots of a legacy worthy of their growth? The answer lay just beyond the horizon, waiting for exploration. The morning sun broke through the leafy canopy of the garden, casting soft patterns on the ground where Betty knelt. In the tranquil light, she found refuge, a sanctuary for thoughts that had long been suppressed. Each weed she pulled was a statement, an act of resilience against the undercurrents of doubt that had seeped into her psyche. Today, she was not merely a caretaker of plants, she was the architect of her own destiny. But even as she worked, her mind raced with the implications of what had unfolded between her and Mark. The fracture lines in their relationship felt more like a labyrinth. How could she navigate through without losing herself again? The vulnerability she had shown was a double-edged sword. If it bore fruit, It could redefine her life, but if it didn't, the fallout could be catastrophic. As she meticulously tended to the soil, a harsh voice echoed in her mind, the persistent criticism she had been conditioned to accept. Betty knocked it back with each deliberate movement of her hands. "This garden is mine," she said quietly, embracing a mantra that defied years of self-doubt. Every once in a while, she would glance toward the house, monitoring Mark's movements. He was still inside, likely immersed in tasks that had always trumped her passions. The thought struck her forcefully. Was she truly ready to place herself back in that old pattern where his agendas dictated her worth? The photograph she clutched was a lifeline, a reminder of the joy she once felt, snippets of laughter and moments of triumph that had been swallowed by the woods of complacency. But now, as she ripped out stubborn weeds, she imagined a different narrative, where she could own both the garden and her aspirations, unfettered by Mark's expectations. Suddenly, she recalled the words he had spoken yesterday, when their defenses momentarily faltered. What if they could both emerge as allies instead of adversaries? Could they redefine their roles? The spark of hope ignited again, urging her to envision a future where they could blend their dreams and strengths. But the question lingered. What if Mark remained uninterested in this growth? Accepting that from time to time, he might push against her endeavors felt like a steep hill to climb. Would she be willing to stand firm even when the winds of resistance gusted against her? In that moment of contemplation, Betty felt a surge of resolve. She decided there would be no room for placing limits on her dreams, even if that meant re-establishing boundaries with Mark. A fresh start would mean advocating for herself, a skill she had almost forgotten she possessed. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, casting a golden hue over her labors, Betty mentally catalogued the next steps. She would present her vision to Mark, not as a negotiation, but as a declaration of her commitment to the garden and ultimately to herself. She couldn't reshape the past, but she could certainly sculpt a future. With her heart racing, she rose from the ground, buoyed by the possibility of transformation. As she stepped back, the garden, rich with promise, reflected her intentions. Yet beneath the surface, uncertainty still simmered. Would Mark understand? Could he truly appreciate what this transformation represented? A knock on the back door startled her. She turned, breath caught in her throat, ready to confront whatever awaited her on the other side. Would this moment be the beginning of true dialogue, or merely another detour in their long-standing conflicts? The door creaked open slowly, and Mark stepped out, eyes scanning the garden with a mix of curiosity and caution. The air thickened with tension, and Betty's heart pounded anew. Would he embrace her journey or continue to dismiss it? "Betty," he began, his tone uncharacteristically soft. "Can we talk about everything?" The day had led her here, but the next step was still a fork in the road. How would she navigate this conversation? A stillness enveloped the garden as Mark's words lingered in the air. Betty felt a cocktail of anticipation and fear bubble within her. This was it, the moment she had both wanted and feared. She had visualized countless scenarios of how this conversation could unfold, but none of them fully captured the raw reality standing before her. "What do you want to talk about?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Adrenaline coursed through her as she took a tentative step forward, trying to quell the nervous energy surging within her. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what you want," he replied, his gaze shifting from the garden to her. A flicker of hope ignited in her chest. Was he really ready to engage with her dreams, to sweep aside the layers of neglect that had choked their relationship? "I want to share something important," she started, her heart racing against the barriers of hesitation. Mark nodded, his brow furrowed with genuine interest, urging her to continue. Taking a deep breath, she stepped away from the familiarity of her emotions and into the realm of her aspirations. "This garden symbolizes more than just plants to me," she began, gesturing toward the vibrant colors blooming around them. It represents my desire to create, to cultivate life, not just in this space, but in my life. I want to nurture my own dreams. His expression shifted, revealing a mixture of confusion and concern. I get that, but don't you want to focus on other priorities? You know how busy things have been. For a moment, his words hung in the air like fog, swirling around her mind, adding weight to her own uncertainties. But in that moment of silence, she recognized the tenacity building inside. That's exactly it, Mark. I've spent so long prioritizing everything but myself. If I don't embrace what I want now, I'll be lost forever. I need you to understand this isn't just a hobby for me. Are you saying you want to do this full-time? He asked, skepticism tainting his voice. I'm saying I want to start small. Take steps to show that I can have my own identity without losing what we've built together. As her words flowed, she could feel a catharsis beginning, as if each syllable she uttered was tearing down the walls, fortified by years of doubt and restraint. Mark looked away, swallowed by the weight of their shared past. I just want to make sure we're stable. We can't afford to lose sight of what matters, he muttered under his breath. I don't want to lose sight of what matters either, but what matters to me has to be part of the conversation. She felt the fire of determination blaze within her, challenging the complacency that had governed their relationship. His face relaxed slightly, as if her words were beginning to penetrate the defenses. I didn't realize you saw it that way, he finally admitted, a hint of uncertainty creeping into his voice. Betty hesitated, sensing an opportunity. Then let's talk about my ideas. What if we set aside time each week to discuss how I can integrate my passions into our life? I don't need a grand plan, just a space to explore. For the first time that day, she saw a glimmer of recognition in Mark's eyes. Perhaps it wasn't just a garden that needed tending. It was their relationship. She could feel the needles of doubt take root within her again, but this time she held firm. If we both want this to flourish, she said, we need to support each other's growth. Mark exhaled slowly, as if processing the weight of her request. Would he reciprocate her commitment to creating a space for her passions? Or would he cling to the old narrative of caution that had limited them both for so long? Betty's heart raced as she awaited his response, realizing this single moment could dictate the course of their relationship. Would they embrace change together or remain tethered to the past? Let's talk more, he finally said, his voice a whisper against the backdrop of the fading sun. But beyond those words, uncertainty loomed, and there was a growing awareness that mere conversation might not be enough to bridge the chasm that had formed. As the shadows lengthened across the garden, Betty wondered if she had taken the initial step towards something transformative or merely skimmed the surface of a deeper conflict awaiting them both. Would their dialogue yield the understanding she craved, or would it plunge them further into disconnection? The wind rustled through the trees, a reminder that change was as inevitable as it was necessary. But would Mark be willing to embrace that change with her? This wasn't just about the garden, it was about both of them. Betty, he finally spoke again, and she felt her breath catch. Can I ask you something else? The moment thickened with new tension, pregnant with questions that could either deepen their connection or expose the fractures within. Would her courage hold against the gravity of his next inquiry? The weight of Mark's voice hung in the air, a palpable tension tightening around them like an unseen cord. Betty's heart raced with both trepidation and the glimmer of hope that perhaps this moment could lead to something substantial. What more was there to explore? Why do you need to do this? Mark finally asked, his eyes searching hers, a mix of concern and curiosity etched on his face. Betty inhaled deeply, feeling the warmth of the sun on her back, contrasted starkly by the chill of uncertainty creeping in. This was a moment requiring clarity, a chance to unveil her motivations, not just to him, but to herself as well. Because I can't ignore what I feel inside any longer, she answered. There's a part of me that's been stifled. It's like this garden, blooming only a fraction of its potential. I want to live fully, not just exist. Mark's frown deepened, perhaps grappling with her metaphor, or sensing the implications of her truth. I understand that you feel unfulfilled, he said slowly. But what if this pursuit comes at a cost? What if you change? The thought sent a ripple of anxiety through Betty. What if she did change? Would she lose him? The doubt whispered insidiously in her mind, but she pushed it aside. Change is unavoidable, Mark. I don't want to mold myself into something just to fit someone else's expectations. Your expectations. We can both grow. He looked unconvinced, still caught between the familiar comfort of a predictable life and the anxiety of venturing into the unknown. It scares me, he confessed, as if admitting a fear could fracture their bond. She wanted to reach forward, to guide him through apprehension, like a lighthouse directing lost ships to shore. I know it's scary, but wouldn't you rather take that risk with me than be anchored by routine and fear? Mark hesitated, and in that silence, Betty felt the familiar chill of doubt creep back. Had she overstepped? Was she pushing him too hard? Her mind raced as she desperately sought to strike an emotional chord. This isn't just for me. It's about us. If I thrive as an individual, I can be a better partner for you too. His gaze softened at that, creating a flicker of warmth. Maybe her words were beginning to unravel the knots of fear binding him. I've just always thought stability was the safest course, he replied. The vulnerability in his voice broke something open inside her. He wasn't just a cautious partner, but a scared one as well. Stability can often be a facade, she said, her voice taking on an earnest tone. What we have now feels safe, but is that really living? Is it what we truly want? If we remain stagnant, won't we lose a part of ourselves? She saw the consideration flash in his eyes. Perhaps their conversations no longer had to center around fear, but rather on shared aspirations, collaborative dreams. A thought crystallized in her mind. Perhaps she could help Mark face his own fears, much like she was confronting hers. Let's work together, she suggested, her outline of a plan becoming clearer. We can dedicate weekends to explore my ideas, shop for materials, plan projects. I can seek mentorship and use your insight. Who knows what we might discover about ourselves in the process? Mark leaned back, unfurling his arms as if shedding a heavy cloak. The tension seemed to ease, making room for hope. I could help with planning. If we can frame it as a joint endeavor, maybe I wouldn't feel so apprehensive. Betty's heart quickened. This was the pivot she longed for. They could tread this new path together, forging a new shared identity rooted in mutual support. The excitement surged within her as she began envisioning their weekends filled with creativity, challenges, and bonding rather than the mundane. Yet, as they spoke about possibilities, a nagging question lodged itself in her mind. Was Mark ready for the deeper changes their journey would require? Would he truly understand the relationship's dynamic needed to evolve? Or would past fears resurface, jeopardizing everything? The whispers of uncertainty danced at the edges of her resolution, but she brushed them away. Mark, can you promise me one thing? Anything, he replied, sincerity brightening his gaze. Promise me you'll remain open to the idea that this, what we're discussing, could change everything. He nodded slowly, as if turning over the weight of her words in his mind. Okay, I promise. But as we dive into these changes, I need you to promise something too. A shiver of apprehension shot through her. What would he ask for? What boundaries might he set? Promise me that if things become overwhelming, or if you fear losing yourself, you'll tell me. We'll navigate this together, no matter the cost. As Betty absorbed his request, she felt the familiar weight of pressure mount. Was she ready to maintain that dialogue? Driven by the fear of slipping back into old habits, she nodded, her voice a whisper. I promise. But just as relief washed over her, she realized this was only the beginning. They stood at the precipice of transformation, and yet the path ahead was clouded with uncertainty. What if their journey revealed more fractured parts of themselves they were unprepared to confront? The air thickened around them, an unspoken tension intertwined with the thrill of new possibilities. How much would they truly be able to embrace? Would this endeavor solidify their bond, or would they falter, facing hidden truths they had avoided for too long? The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the garden. As the light waned, Betty could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her. They had exchanged promises, but the real test had yet to come. Would their willingness to grow be enough to navigate the choppy waters of change? Or would the currents prove too strong? "Mark, she began. But the words caught in her throat as a sudden realization gripped her. They needed more than just promises. They needed action. But what action would that be? Would they both be ready to face the demands of this evolving partnership? Or would hesitation turn newfound hope into unfulfilled wishes? The thought hung like a storm cloud over them, a tempest ready to unleash its fury. As they stood together in the dimming light, Betty felt a swell of determination rise within her, urging her forward into the unknown. She couldn't afford to let doubts paralyze her now. Mark had agreed to be open to possibilities, but that promise could only take them so far. Action was essential, and they needed a solid plan, a tangible next step to begin this journey they were about to embark on. "Let's outline some ideas tonight," she suggested, trying to keep her voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through her. "What have you always wanted to try but didn't because of time or resources?" She hoped to ignite the spark of creativity within him, to encourage the burgeoning partnership of collaborators rather than reluctant bystanders. He appeared pensive, his brow furrowed as he mulled over her question. After a long moment, he said, "I used to love woodworking. We had a workshop back home, but I haven't had the space or the time here." His words came slow, almost wistful, and Betty sensed a memory laced with both nostalgia and a twinge of regret. "Then that's our first project," Betty exclaimed, her enthusiasm bubbling over. "We can set up a workspace in the garage and start light. What kind of things did you make?" Mark smiled faintly, the hint of nostalgia blossoming on his face. "I always enjoyed making furniture, small pieces mostly. I even crafted a dining table for my parents' house once." "Perfect. What if we recreate that table but add our twist, something unique that reflects us?" she suggested, allowing her imagination to lead her further. "It will not only connect to your past, but give us something to build together." As she spoke, the energy shifted. The air that had once felt tense with the weight of secrets and fears grew lighter, infused with the excitement of shared creativity. Mark seemed to ease into the idea, the earlier hesitation dissipating as he began to articulate details, types of wood, potential designs, the tools they would need. Yet, grounding her exhilaration was a sobering thought. Would this project really bridge the gap between them? What if their artistic visions clashed, or if his fear of failure rose to the surface again? It was a risk, but one they had to confront. They couldn't just skate over the delicate tensions. "Will you teach me? I have no experience and I might mess things up," she asked candidly, admitting her insecurities. Stepping into the role of teacher seemed to enliven him further. "Of course. It'll be a learning process for both of us," he replied earnestly. "We'll figure it out together." His assurance wrapped around her like a soft blanket, yet she couldn't fully shake the anxiety looming nearby. She needed to make sure this wasn't merely a temporary distraction from their deeper issues. The project could illuminate their strengths and weaknesses, but it might also expose vulnerabilities they weren't ready to face. As they continued planning into the evening, her initial excitement transformed into a realization. The fears they held not only threatened to surface during this project, but also had the potential to derail everything they were trying to establish. Betty took a deep breath, focusing on the task at hand. "Let's also set some boundaries and check in regularly about how we're feeling through this process. I think it will help keep us on track, especially if things get rocky." "Right," Mark agreed, though his tone suggested that he hadn't fully considered the possible confrontation. If we're honest with each other, we should be okay." As Betty absorbed his words, a mix of anxiety and anticipation churned within her. Was honesty really enough in the heat of a creative endeavor? Only time would tell how their project would reflect their inner selves. The following weeks loomed ahead, filled with promise and potential pitfalls. They stood at the edge of a significant chapter in their lives, one marked not only by the physical act of building something new, but also their resilience as partners, embracing a journey fraught with challenges. But as she locked eyes with Mark, she was reminded that while they were stepping into the unknown together, they would also have to face the entrenched patterns that might resist change. Could they really break through those old cycles and emerge stronger on the other side? "Mark," she began, unsure of how to voice the nagging concerns that persisted in her mind. "What if we find ourselves lost in arguing over how things should be done? What if—" "Then we'll just have to figure it out, won't we?" he cut in, his confident demeanor re-emerging. "We've promised to navigate this together." She nodded, a flicker of hope mingling with unease. It was less about the woodworking than it was about the raw prospect of shared growth. An intricate dance of cooperation and conflict they would have to learn. As they turned toward their plans, the weight of the future loomed over them like a tangible entity, bidding them to move forward, one hesitant step at a time. But how deep-rooted were those initial fears, and would they persist to haunt them as they ventured into this new phase together? The unsettling thought hovered in her mind like a distorting mirror, reflecting her uncertainties about who they would find themselves to be when the dust settled. If the dust ever did settle, what awaited them as they reached for these new visions, thrust into both peril and opportunity? Would their joint aspirations hold weight, or would they become an echo of unmet expectations reverberating in their relationship? As the sun rose over the horizon, filtering through the dusty windows of their garage-turned-workshop, Betty felt a spark of excitement igniting within her. The project stood before them, a challenge laden with potential. The scent of fresh wood and the anticipation of creating something meaningful resonated deeply in her chest. That excitement, however, was interwoven with an undercurrent of anxiety. Would they be able to transform their collaboration into something greater than the sum of its parts? Betty stepped forward, surveying the space they had begun to organize, a patchwork of tools, lumber, and half-formed ideas. The air was thick with promise, but each passing moment also reminded her of the fragility of their newfound resolve. In some ways, this was more than just a furniture project. It felt like they were trying to piece together a new version of their relationship, fragile yet potentially beautiful. "All right, what's our first step?" Mark's voice broke through her thoughts, brimming with enthusiasm. She admired his eagerness, almost a testament to the progress they'd made. But alongside it lay a hint of apprehension, imposing the question of how long that initial momentum might sustain them. With a flutter of determination, she replied, "Let's start with measuring and cutting the wood for the frame. I'll handle the measurements, and you can show me how to use the saw." She tried to keep her tone light, but the weight of responsibility pressed against her. If their first major task together ended in frustration, could their project, and with it, their relationship, survive? Mark nodded, but as they pulled out the pieces of wood, an undercurrent of tension crept into their dynamics. Her inexperience was palpable, and as she fumbled with the tape measure, she felt Mark's eyes scrutinizing her. It wasn't just about creating a table. It felt as though the very act of working together forced them to confront long-standing vulnerabilities. "I'm not sure how to line this up," she admitted, biting her lip. The notion of failing in front of him clawed at her composure. Her insecurity flared, and she silently willed herself to push through it. "Here," he said, stepping closer, guiding her hands to align the wood properly. As his fingers brushed against hers, she couldn't help but feel that the gesture was charged, filled with the complexities of their shared history. "Thanks," Betty murmured, forcing herself to focus on the task instead of the uncharted territory of emotions brewing beneath the surface. But as they began to cut the wood, a sudden blast from a passing car interrupted the moment. Startled, she accidentally jerked the saw, sending a jolt of adrenaline coursing through her. Mark instinctively reached for her arm, concern etched on his face. "Are you okay?" She met his gaze, their eyes locking in a shared moment of vulnerability, a silent acknowledgement that they still had barriers to overcome. The atmosphere grew thick with unspoken words. "Yeah, I just got distracted," she replied, the implications of her admission lingering in the air. Challenging moments often reveal hidden truths, and Betty now understood what lay beneath their surface: the weight of expectation, the pressure to perform, and the ever-looming specter of past disappointments. Would she crumble under the stress? "We need to talk about our boundaries," Betty blurted out suddenly, unnerved by the realization that the very project meant to bring them closer was simultaneously unearthing deeper tensions. "I don't want us to fight about the little things. Can we agree to be clear on expectations?" Mark regarded her for a long moment, a storm brewing in his eyes. "I think we need to allow for mistakes. It's part of learning, right?" His response surprised her. Perhaps this project was pushing him too. Their discussions had always skimmed the surface, but maybe wrestling with these practicalities might shake loose deeper conversations. Still, doubt lingered like a shadow, and she felt the urge to retreat. Taking a breath, she replied, "Maybe you're right, but let's check in regularly, and if we feel frustrated or resentful, we should talk instead of letting it build up." She prayed the concept was as easy to implement as it was to articulate. "Deal," Mark said, his face easing into a more receptive expression. The agreement felt solid, yet she was aware how fragile it could be. The saw roared to life again, bringing them back to the task at hand, but Betty found her mind swirling. This was more than a woodworking project. It meant confronting her fears on multiple levels, of being heard, of failing, of risking vulnerability in ways she had shied away from previously. She could feel the edges of her capabilities stretching, demanding her to rise and meet the challenge head-on. As they continued to work, a new awareness began to unfold within her. Each cut, each measurement was not just a physical act, but a step toward a new dynamic. Could projects like this unravel deeper issues, or would they entangle them further in the web of their unresolved past? As they moved through the task, the thrill of creation mingled with the weight of their expectations, leaving her wondering if she truly had what it took to navigate all the complexities that came with building, both the table and their relationship. What would they discover about themselves as they transformed mere wood into something meaningful? And would those revelations strengthen their connection or unravel them further? Betty focused intently on the task, her hands moving almost subconsciously as she measured and marked the wood for their project. Each stroke of the pencil felt like an exercise in reclaiming her confidence, transforming anxiety into action. With every cut, her resolve solidified. She was capable, she was present, and she refused to let past failures dictate her future. "Let's cut this piece down to 3 feet, she instructed, her voice steadier now. Mark, with newfound respect for her determination, nodded and adjusted the saw accordingly. As he positioned the blade against the wood, her heart quickened, a mixture of trepidation and thrill. The sound of the saw slicing through the timber reverberated, punctuating a rhythm of collaboration and mutual trust. But a flutter of doubt skittered through her. What if he was only placating her? What if deep down he still doubted her abilities? "Just like that," he said, breaking the silence. "You're getting the hang of it." The sincerity in his tone urged her to meet his gaze. In that moment, she realized this was more than just a woodworking lesson. They were forming a new lexicon for their relationship, one built on encouragement rather than criticism. "Thanks for believing in me," she replied, an earnestness creeping into her voice. But then, a memory flickered, momentarily dimming her excitement. Past arguments where her self-worth was tied to Mark's approval. Was this moment of clarity just a temporary reprieve from her ongoing insecurities? Banishing those thoughts, she directed her focus back to the wood, conscious of the need to foster open dialogue. "Can we take a break?" she asked, watching as he turned off the saw, the whirring noise dying down. "I want to regroup for a moment. How do you feel so far?" Mark put down the tools, his brow furrowing slightly as he searched her expression. "Honestly, I'm learning a lot, but I feel like we still have some unsaid things between us." A heavy air settled in the garage, and she could feel her pulse racing anew. "What do you mean?" she asked, her fingers still gripping the edge of the workbench. She could sense that this conversation was inevitable, yet daunting. "I think we've been skirting around the real issues in our relationship. The project is a good distraction, but it won't solve anything unless we address our patterns," he replied, his gaze unwavering. With each word, the truth he held out beckoned her. This was her chance to confront the feelings that gnawed at her, to unravel the tightly held fears that simmered beneath the surface. "I agree. I want to work on us, but I'm afraid of the fallout," she admitted, the weight of her confession hanging heavily in the air. Mark moved closer, and the intensity of his gaze pressed her to open deeper. "If we don't face it now, it's only going to build. We're both scared, but we can't keep avoiding the conversation." His honesty pierced her thoughts, igniting both apprehension and a flicker of hope. Could they finally step into the light of transparency? She took a deep breath, feeling the pull of vulnerability tugging at her. "What if we started with one thing that bothers us? Something small, but meaningful?" He nodded slowly, reflecting her earnestness. "Okay, for me, it's the lack of communication when things get stressful. I feel like we retreat into silence instead of talking it out." His words echoed the truth she had felt. "Even small conflicts can feel insurmountable when we hold on to them," she responded carefully, aware this was the crucible for their development. "I tend to withhold my feelings out of fear. I need to be better at expressing when something bothers me." "Then let's promise to check in regularly," he suggested, "even when it's uncomfortable. This project is a workout for our relationship as much as for our hands." A wave surged within her, a blend of apprehension and excitement. If they committed to radically redefining how they communicated, could it lead to something deeper than either had anticipated? As they resumed cutting and assembling pieces of wood, a shared anticipation began to weave through their energies, creating a fabric they both could call their own. Every slice transformed the wood, just as every concession could potentially reshape their relationship. Yet beneath the layers of newfound agreement, a creeping dread lingered. If they were remodeling their connection, what other hidden fractures would be exposed? Would they emerge stronger, or would past wounds crack open anew, threatening everything they had begun to rebuild? A deeper confrontation loomed just beyond the next stage of their project. Could it lead to harmony, or would it disrupt any progress they had made? With each passing day, the workshop reverberated with the sounds of creation. Betty and Mark worked hand in hand, meticulously crafting their dining table. But beneath the surface of wood shavings and laughter, a complex tapestry of emotions unfolded. Each cut they made drew courage from shared aspirations, and yet the specter of conflict lingered, urging them onward in their quest for deeper communication. Betty could sense the shifting dynamic. What had once been a hesitant exchange was morphing into a collaborative rhythm, each passing moment instilling a newfound confidence. Familiarity began chiseling away at her fears, revealing the woman she had buried for too long, a woman with dreams worthy of fulfillment. One sunny afternoon, as they prepared to sand the table's edges, a familiar tension brought the conversation to an unexpected halt. "Betty," Mark began, putting his sander down, "I want to talk about the clashes we've experienced while working on this project." Breathing deeply, Betty felt her heart race, but there was also a glimmer of resolve. "We need to address it," she replied, grateful that they could openly communicate. "I agree that some moments have been challenging." Mark's eyes searched hers, a mixture of vulnerability and urgency emblazoned in his expression. I think we need to confront what's beneath those frustrations. Perhaps our conflicts reflect deeper, unresolved issues. For the first time, Betty allowed a small smile to spread across her face. This openness was a testament to their growth, and she was eager to engage. You're right. I know sometimes I retreat under stress, and I need to speak up more instead of letting it boil over into snide comments or silence. Mark nodded solemnly, acknowledging her confession. It's the same for me. I can be quick to dismiss your contributions out of fear that it'll lead to more friction. The sincerity in his voice encouraged Betty to dig deeper. Deciding to seize this moment, she suggested, let's explore one specific instance, a recent disagreement. Remember the time I asked for help with the measurements? She saw him stiffen slightly at the memory, but he did not retreat. Yeah, I felt uncomfortable with your suggestions, Mark replied, unfolding the narrative in a way that invited understanding instead of blame. The truth is, I didn't communicate my needs clearly, and it felt like you brushed off my involvement. Their exchange felt raw, but the revelation rippled a current of clarity through her. Mark's brows furrowed, realization dawning on him. And I dismissed your feelings in the process, causing that damage to deepen. I wasn't fully present. His admission washed over her like a soothing balm, the kind of acknowledgement that could rebuild a fractured foundation. The fresh air in the workshop felt less stifled, replaced by a gust of vulnerability swirling them closer. I think, Betty said carefully, this project is helping us realize that these conversations are essential. They're not merely about functional disagreements, but about navigating our individual needs and respecting each other's roles. Exactly, Mark responded, his tone emboldened. It brings us to collaborate rather than compete. We're stronger when we embrace our roles as partners. Betty felt the weight of validation fill the space between them. This was the transformation she desperately sought, not only in the project, but in their relationship itself. As they resumed sanding, the air thrummed with renewed energy, buoyed by a sense of shared purpose. It wasn't just about building a table, but rediscovering who they were as partners. Each pass of the sander became more than just a task. It became an exercise in cooperation, an investment in their budding intimacy and trust. A few days later, the project reached its pinnacle. The table stood before them, a beautiful amalgamation of their efforts. As sunlight streamed through the garage, highlighting the expertly polished wood, Betty felt a surge of pride. This was not just a physical manifestation of their hard work, but a testament to their growth, their willingness to confront earlier conflicts. This isn't just a table, she said softly, admiring their handiwork. It's a representation of our renewed commitment, a reflection of what we can achieve together when we communicate openly. Mark stepped closer and gazed at the table with reverence. I see it now. It embodies our journey, as much as each joint and jointment symbolizes our efforts to repair and grow. In that moment, they exchanged knowing glances, two partners unified by their triumph over adversity. The pieces fell into place, revealing a path forward paved with understanding and mutual respect. As they prepared to unveil their creation to the family, an explosion of joy burst in Betty's chest, a genuine excitement that bloomed in tandem with her newfound sense of self-worth. The table was ready. She was ready. Yet beneath her triumph was the undeniable reality. Nothing was static. Change was a continuous river that demanded ongoing navigation. Mark, she began, savoring the anticipation of what lay ahead. Can we promise to keep this line of communication open? To continue forging our paths together, no matter how uncomfortable? He reached for her, intertwining their fingers, a subtle yet powerful declaration. Absolutely. We'll take every challenge as an opportunity to grow. And with that vow whispered in the warm light of their workshop, Betty felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. In reclaiming her voice and standing strong alongside Mark, she had transformed not only herself, but the very fabric of their relationship. As they stepped into their future, she knew there would be more challenges awaiting them. But this time, they would face them as partners, hand in hand, embracing growth without fear. The journey had begun, one that would endure beyond a single project, ushering them into a lifetime where they could construct their dreams together. Now, as they embraced the truth of their newly forged connection, she understood their story excluded old resentments and invited shared dreams. Betty had finally discovered her worth, and so had Mark. This was just the beginning of their story. You need to subscribe now to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories that dive into the transformative power of love and communication. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and let others find their way to these heartfelt narratives. Comment below your reactions and theories about how this journey of growth resonates with you. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion and experience their own journeys of healing and transformation. Don't wait even one more second. Your support is crucial.